The night air in the control tower was always a little colder than anywhere else on the base. Maybe it was the altitude, maybe the endless hum of electronics, or maybe it was just the weight of responsibility that pressed down on everyone inside. Tonight, the air felt especially heavy thick with anticipation. Laced with the metallic scent of coffee and nervous sweat, Nick adjusted his headset, fingers trembling just a little as he reached for the battered spiral notebook he always kept. At his station, the notebook was filled with neat, tiny handwriting, patterns, frequencies, emergency procedures, and most importantly, his own reminders. Breathe, enunciate, don't rush. You know this. He could feel the eyes of the other controllers on him as he took his seat at the far end of the console. The night shift was a mix of old hands and new faces, but Nick was always the odd one out. He was the youngest, the quietest, and most obvious of all, the only one who stuttered. It wasn't always bad, but under pressure, when every syllable mattered, it sometimes felt like his own voice was his enemy. The veterans had their rituals, jokes, stories, and a running pool on who would crack first during a busy night. Nick had heard the whispers, the not-so-subtle laughs when he fumbled a word or hesitated on the radio. Hope the jets don't run out of fuel while he's giving instructions. One of them had joked just last week. The others had laughed. And Nick had smiled along, pretending it didn't sting. But tonight, he was determined to prove himself. He'd studied every approach, memorized every contingency, and rehearsed every phrase until the words felt like muscle memory. He was ready, at least. He hoped he was. The shift supervisor, a gruff man named Harlan, called everyone to attention. All right, listen up. We've got a full deck tonight. 42 birds coming in from the exercise. Weather's holding, but we've got a low-pressure system moving in from the west. Keep your eyes on the radar, and your head's in the game. Nick nodded, his heart thumping. 42 jets. It would be the busiest night he'd ever worked. He glanced at the clock. 21 o'clock. The first wave was due in 20 minutes. He settled into his routine, checking the radar, confirming frequencies, and running through his mental checklist. The other controllers chatted quietly, their voices a low murmur beneath the steady beep of the radar. Nick focused on the screens, letting the familiar patterns calm his nerves. As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the room grew. The night sky outside the tower was a deep, endless blue, dotted with the distant lights of inbound aircraft. The base below was a hive of activity runway lights glowing, ground crews moving like ants, and the faint roar of jet engines in the distance. Nick's radio crackled to life. Tower, this is Eagle One, requesting approach clearance. He pressed the transmit button, forcing his voice to stay steady. Eagle One, cleared to approach runway 27. Maintain current heading and descend to 3,000. There was a brief pause, then a calm reply. Copy, Tower, descending to 3,000. Nick exhaled, relief flooding through him. The words had come out clean, no stutter, no hesitation. 1 down, 41 to go. The other controllers handled their own traffic, their voices confident and smooth. Nick listened, absorbing their cadence, their phrasing, their easy banter with the pilots. He envied their confidence, their ability to make it all sound effortless. As the first jets touched down, the room grew busier. Controllers called out headings, altitudes, and clearances, their hands moving over the consoles with practiced ease. Nick kept his focus, tracking his assigned aircraft, double-checking every instruction before he spoke. But even as he worked, he could feel the eyes on him. The veterans watched, waiting for a slip, a stumble, a moment of weakness. Nick tried to ignore them, but the pressure built with every minute. At 21:30, the supervisor called for a quick break. The controllers stretched, grabbed coffee, and swapped stories. Nick stayed at his station, reviewing his notes, unwilling to risk losing his rhythm. One of the older controllers, a man named Davis, sauntered over. "Hey, Nick, you ready for the rush? Hope your tongue doesn't tie itself in knots tonight." Nick forced a smile. "I'll be fine." Davis grinned, clapping him on the shoulder. "That's the spirit. Just remember, if you get stuck, just wave your arms. Maybe the pilots will see you from up there." The others laughed. Nick looked away, focusing on his screen. He'd heard it all before. Tonight, he told himself, he'd let his work speak. For him, the break ended, and the room snapped back to attention. The radar lit up with new contact jets inbound, stacked at different altitudes, each one needing a safe path to the runway. The supervisor barked orders, assigning aircraft to each controller. Nick's sector was the busiest. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Tower, this is Falcon 3, requesting landing instructions." He keyed the mic, his voice steady. "F Falcon 3, reduce speed to 200 knots. Descend to 2000 and turn left heading 180. Roger, Tower. Reducing speed, descending, turning left." The instructions flowed, each one a small victory. Nick's confidence grew with each successful exchange. He could do this. He was doing this, but the veterans kept watching, waiting. Davis leaned over to another controller, whispering just loud enough for Nick to hear. "Let's see how he handles the next wave. Bet he chokes." Nick clenched his jaw, refusing to let the words get to him. He focused on the radar, tracking the inbound jets, calculating their paths, anticipating their needs. Outside, the weather began to shift. Clouds rolled in, obscuring the stars, and a light drizzle pattered against the tower windows. The supervisor called for updates, his voice tense. "Visibility's dropping. Keep those patterns tight. No room for error tonight." Nick nodded, adjusting his approach vectors, tightening the spacing between aircraft. The workload increased, the pressure mounting with every passing minute. At 22 o'clock, the first sign of trouble appeared. The radar flickered, just for a moment, then stabilized. Nick frowned, making a note in his log. He'd seen glitches before, but never during a night this busy. He called over the technician, a young woman named Carla. "Hey, Carla, can you check the radar? It just flickered." She nodded, pulling up diagnostics on her tablet. "Looks like a minor power fluctuation. Should be fine." Nick nodded, but unease gnawed at him. He kept a close eye on the screens, ready for anything. The next wave of jets checked in, their voices overlapping on the radio. Nick juggled instructions, his mind racing to keep up. He could feel the sweat on his palms, the tension in his shoulders. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then died. The room plunged into darkness, the only illumination the faint glow of emergency exit signs. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. Then chaos erupted. Controllers shouted, scrambling for flashlights, fumbling with radios. The supervisor barked orders, his voice barely audible over the confusion. Heart pounded. He reached for his notebook, flipping to the emergency procedures. He'd trained for this, everyone had, but theory was different from reality. He grabbed his flashlight, scanning the room. The backup generator kicked in, ringing. The radio's back online, but the radar remained dark. The supervisor's voice cut through the noise. "We've lost radar. All controllers, switch to manual procedures. Track your aircraft by call sign and position reports." No mistakes. Nick swallowed hard, his mind racing. 42 jets scattered across the sky, each one relying on him for guidance. No radar, no automation, just his memory, his notes, and his voice. He keyed the mic, forcing his voice to stay calm. "All aircraft, this is Tower. We have lost radar." Maintain current altitude and hold position. Await further instructions. The responses came in, tense but steady. Nick scribbled call signs and altitudes in his notebook, creating a makeshift. Traffic pattern. The other controllers struggled, their confidence shaken. The veterans who'd mocked him now looked to him for guidance. Nick took a deep breath, steadying his nerves. He could do this. He had to do this. Outside, the storm intensified. Lightning flashed, illuminating the runway in brief, blinding bursts. The jets circled, their fuel dwindling, their pilots growing anxious. Nick's voice, though still marked by the occasional stutter, was a lifeline in the darkness. He issued instructions, coordinated holds, and reassured the pilots. The other controllers followed his lead, adopting his methods, his calm dot as the minutes dragged on. Nick's confidence grew. He was in control, not just of the airspace, but of himself. He glanced at the clock 22:47. The night was far from over, but for the first time, Nick believed he could see it through. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the true test was yet to come. The blackout was just the beginning. The real challenge would push him to the edge, forcing him to confront not just the storm outside, but the doubts within. And when dawn finally broke, nothing would ever be the same. The darkness in the control tower was more than just the absence of light. It was a living, breathing thing, pressing in from all sides. The emergency lamps cast long, flickering shadows across the consoles and faces of the controllers. There, eyes, wide with uncertainty, darted from screen to screen, as if willing the radar to flicker back to life. But the screens remained stubbornly black, and the only sounds were the low hum of the backup generator and the distant, insistent patter of rain against the glass dot. Nick sat at his station, notebook open, pencil poised above the page. He could feel the pressure mounting, a physical weight that settled on his shoulders and pressed down on his chest. 42 jets. 42 pilots, each one trusting him to guide them safely home. The enormity of it was almost too much to bear. He glanced around the room. The veterans who had once laughed at his stutter now looked to him for leadership. There, bravado stripped away by the crisis. Davis, usually so quick with a joke, sat hunched over his console, lips pressed into a thin line. Carla, the technician, hovered by the backup radio, her hands trembling as she checked the connections for the third time. Nick took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. He couldn't afford to let his nerves get the better of him, not now. He flipped to a fresh page in his notebook and began to organize the jets by call sign, altitude, and fuel status. Each entry was a lifeline, a thread that connected him to the pilots circling above. The supervisor, Harlan, barked orders from the center of the room. Manual procedures. Keep your sectors tight. No mistakes. His voice was gruff, but Nick could hear the edge of fear beneath the command. Nick keyed the mic, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Eagle 1, report position and fuel status. The reply crackled through the static. Tower, this is Eagle 1. Holding at 3,000, fuel at minimum. Nick jotted down the information, then moved on to the next jet. One by one, he checked in with each pilot, building a mental map of the sky. The process was slow, painstaking, but it was the only way to maintain order in the chaos dot as he worked. Memories surfaced, fragments of his past that he had tried so hard to bury. He remembered the first time he had spoken in front of a crowd, the words catching in his throat, the laughter that followed. He remembered the teachers who had told him to slow down and think before you speak, as if that would somehow untangle the knots in his tongue. He remembered the way his father had squeezed his shoulder, telling him that everyone had their own battles to fight. But most of all, he remembered the nights he had spent listening to air traffic controllers on his old radio, mimicking their calm, measured voices in the dark. He had dreamed of one day sitting in a tower like this, guiding jets through the night sky. He had never imagined it would feel like this, so exhilarating, so terrifying, so utterly vital. The storm outside intensified, lightning flashing in jagged arcs across the sky. The runway lights, powered by a separate circuit, flickered but held steady. Nick could see the silhouettes of the jets as they circled, waiting for their turn to land. He called up the first group, issuing instructions with as much clarity as he could muster. Falcon 3, reduce speed to 180 knots. Prepare for approach on runway 27. Maintain current altitude until cleared. The pilot's voice was tense but steady. Roger, tower. Reducing speed, holding altitude. Nick guided. The jet in, his heart pounding with each step. He could hear the fuel warning in the pilot's voice, the urgency that crept in as the minutes ticked by. But he kept his own voice calm, focusing on the rhythm of the instructions. The jet touched. Down, tires screeching against the wet tarmac. Nick exhaled, relief flooding through him. 1 down, 41 to go. The next jet checked in, then the next. Each landing was a small victory, a testament to Nick's training and determination. But the strain was beginning to show. His hand, cramped from writing, his throat grew dry from speaking, and his mind raced to keep track of the ever-shifting patterns. Davis called out from across the room. "Nick, I've got a jet low on fuel in your sector." Call sign Viper 6. Nick scanned his notes, locating the jet. V Viper 6, report position. The reply was immediate. Tower, this is Viper 6. Fuel critical. Request immediate landing. Nick's mind raced. The jet was at 3,000, holding east of the field. He checked the approach, calculated the spacing, and issued the clearance. Viper 6, cleared for immediate approach. Descend to 1,000, turn left heading 210. The jet began its descent, the tension in the room palpable. Nick watched the runway, willing the jet to appear through the rain dot it broke. Through the clouds, landing lights blazing. The wheels touched down, and the jet rolled to a stop at the end of the runway. The room erupted in applause, the tension breaking for a brief, glorious moment. Nick allowed himself a small smile. He was doing it. He was really doing it, but there was no time to celebrate. The next wave was already inbound, their voices crackling through the static dot as the hours passed. Fatigue set in. Nick's hand shook as he wrote, his eyes burned from staring at the screens, and his voice grew hoarse from constant use. But he refused to quit. He owed it to the pilots, to his team, to himself. The other controllers began to rally, inspired by Nick's calm under pressure. They adopted his system, using notebooks and checklists to track their own sectors. The room, once chaotic, began to find its rhythm. Harlan moved from station to station, offering words of encouragement. "Keep it up, everyone. We're getting through this." Nick glanced at the clock. 1 o'clock. The night was half over, but the hardest part was yet to come. Outside, the storm raged on. The jets circled, their fuel dwindling, their pilots growing more anxious with each passing minute. Nick took a deep breath, steeling himself for the next challenge. He had come this far. He wasn't about to let his doubts win now. He keyed the mic, his voice steady and strong. "All aircraft, this is Tower. We're going to get you home. One at a time. Stay with me." The replies came in, a chorus of trust and hope. Nick smiled, the weight on his shoulders a little lighter. For the first time, he believed he could do this, not just survive the night, but truly lead. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the storm was about to take a turn for the worse. The blackout was only the beginning. The real test was still to come, and when it did, Nick would have to reach deeper than ever before, drawing on every ounce of courage, every lesson learned, every memory of struggle and triumph, because sometimes the only way out is through. The hours after midnight were always the hardest. Fatigue crept in, subtle and insidious, blurring the lines between memory and reality. In the control tower, the air was thick with exhaustion and adrenaline. The storm outside had grown into a living beast train lashing the glass, wind howling around the structure, lightning illuminating the runway in staccato bursts. Nick's hand ached from writing. His voice was raw, but he pressed on. Each new call sign, each new voice in his headset, was another thread in the intricate web he was weaving to keep the sky safe. He had landed 12 jets so far, each one a small miracle in the darkness. 30 more circled above, their pilots, counting on him. The other controllers had fallen into a rhythm, following Nick's lead. The room, once chaotic, now pulsed with a tense, focused energy. Harlan moved among them, offering quiet encouragement, but even he deferred to Nick's system. The veterans who had once mocked him now watched with a mix of awe and gratitude, but the storm was relentless. Visibility dropped to near zero. The runway lights flickered, threatened by the wind and rain. The backup generator groaned under the strain, and every flicker of the emergency lamps sent a fresh jolt of fear through the room. Nick's mind raced, calculating approach vectors, spacing out landings, tracking fuel levels. He could feel the pressure mounting, the margin for error shrinking with each passing minute. A voice crackled in his headset, Falcon 5, low on fuel, requesting immediate landing. Nick scanned his notes, found a gap in the pattern, and issued instructions. F Falcon 5, turn left heading 170, descend to 1000, cleared for approach runway 27. The pilot's reply was tight with fear. Roger. Tower, turning left, descending. Nick watched the runway, heart pounding. The jet appeared through the rain, landing lights blazing. It touched down hard, skidding on the wet tarmac, but stayed on the runway. Another small miracle. He exhaled, relief flooding through him. But there was no time to rest. The next jet was already calling in, voice strained, fuel critical. Nick's world narrowed to the sound of voices, the scratch of pencil on paper, the steady rhythm of instructions and responses. He lost track of time, lost track of everything, except the task at hand. But outside the tower, the storm was getting worse. A sudden burst of lightning struck the field, plunging the runway into darkness. The emergency lights flickered, then died. For a moment, the only illumination came from the lightning itself, painting the runway in ghostly white. Panic surged in the tower. Controllers shouted, scrambling for flashlights. Harlan's voice cut through the chaos. Everyone stay calm. Use your checklists. Keep your sectors tight. Nick felt his own panic rising, but he forced it down. He remembered his training, remembered the nights spent rehearsing for every possible scenario. He grabbed his flashlight, propped it on the console, and kept working. He keyed the mic, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. All aircraft, this is Tower. We have lost runway lights. Maintain holding patterns. Await further instructions. The replies came in, tense but controlled. The pilots trusted him. He couldn't let them down. Carla, the technician, rushed to his side. Nick, the generator's overloaded. We're trying to reroute power, but it could be a while before we get the lights back. Nick nodded, mind racing. He needed a way to guide the jets in without lights. He remembered a story his father had told him, a World War II controller who had used flares and radio to land planes during a blackout. He turned to Harlan. We need flares on the runway, and vehicles with headlights to mark the center line. Harlan hesitated, then nodded. Do it. Carla, get the ground crew moving. Within minutes, the ground crew was on the field, braving the storm to set up flares and line up vehicles along the runway. Their headlights cut through the darkness, creating a makeshift landing strip. Nick relayed the new instructions to the pilots. All aircraft, this is Tower. We have set up visual markers on the runway. Follow the flares and headlights for approach. Maintain radio contact at all times. The first jet to attempt the landing was Eagle 2, low on fuel, pilot's voice, tight with anxiety. Nick talked him through the approach, step by step, his own voice calm and measured. Eagle 2, you are on final. Keep the flares to your left, the headlights to your right. Reduce speed to 150 knots. The jet appeared through the rain, lined up with the makeshift runway. Nick held his breath as it touched down, skidding slightly, but staying on course. The ground crew cheered, their voices faint over the radio. One by one, the jets landed, guided by Nick's steady instructions. Each landing was a triumph of teamwork and ingenuity, a testament to the power of calm under pressure. But the storm was far from over. A new problem emerged: 2 jets, low on fuel, approaching from opposite directions. Both needed to land immediately. But there was only one usable runway. Nick's mind raced, calculating the timing, the spacing, the risk. He made a decision. Viper 8, hold at 1,000, circle east of the field. Falcon 9, cleared for immediate approach. The pilots acknowledged, their voices tense, but trusting. Nick watched the runway, willing Falcon 9 to land quickly. The jet touched down, rolled to a stop, and cleared the runway. Viper 8, cleared for approach. Descend and land as soon as possible. The jet came in hot, almost too fast, but Nick talked the pilot through the landing. The wheels touched down, skidded, then caught. The jet rolled to a stop. Safe. Nick exhaled, exhaustion washing over him. He had landed 20 jets so far, each one a victory in the face of overwhelming odds. But the night was not over. A new voice crackled in his headset, an unfamiliar call sign, the voice shaky with fear. Tower, this is Ghost One. I've lost. Instruments low on fuel. Request assistance. Nick's heart skipped a beat. A lost jet in a blackout with no instruments. The worst-case scenario. He keyed the mic, forcing his voice to stay calm. Go Ghost One, this is Tower. Can you see the flares on the runway? A pause. Negative, Tower. I see nothing. I'm flying blind. Nick's mind raced. He needed a way to guide the jet in, to bring the pilot home. He remembered his father's words. Trust your instincts. Trust your training. He grabbed his flashlight, pointed it out the window, and began to flash a pattern 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. So he keyed the mic. Ghost One, look for a flashing light from the tower. That's your beacon. Turn toward it and descend. A long pause then. Tower, I see it. Turning now. Nick talked the pilot through the approach, step by step, his own nerves barely. Contained. Keep the light centered. Descend slowly. You're almost home. The jet appeared through the rain, lined up with the tower. Nick guided the pilot down, his voice a lifeline in the darkness. The jet touched down, rolled to a stop, and the pilot's voice broke through the static, choked with relief. Thank you, Tower. Thank you. The room erupted in applause. The tension breaking for a brief, glorious moment. Nick allowed himself a small smile. He was doing it. He was really doing it. But there were still jets in the sky, still pilots counting on him. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the final push. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the tower, Nick was calm, focused, and determined. Would see this through? He would bring them all home. Because sometimes the only way out is through. and Nick was ready. The storm showed no sign of letting up. If anything, the wind howled louder, rattling the glass of the tower, and the rain came down in sheets so thick it blurred the world beyond the runway into a swirling gray void. The emergency generator throbbed, its hum now a constant companion, and the makeshift runway of headlights and flares flickered with every gust. Nick's hand cramped around his pencil, his notebook now crowded with call signs, altitudes, fuel stats, and landing times. The other controllers, faces drawn and pale, looked to him for every decision. Even Harlan, the supervisor, had stopped giving orders and instead hovered quietly behind Nick's chair, trusting the youngest and once most mocked member of the team to keep everyone alive that 20-8 jets had landed. 14 still circled. Above, their pilots growing more anxious as the night dragged on and the storm battered the field. Nick's voice, though hoarse and sometimes catching on a syllable, had become the anchor for every soul in the sky. He barely noticed the stutter anymore. The pilots didn't seem to care, either. They responded to his calm, to his certainty, to the way he never left them alone in the dark. Each time a jet touched down, a wave of relief swept through the tower, only to be replaced by renewed tension. As the next call sign crackled over the radio, "Tower, this is Eagle 7. Fuel critical." Requesting immediate approach, Nick checked his notes. Eagle 7 had been in the holding pattern the longest. He scanned the sky, then the runway, calculating the timing in his head. Eagle 7, cleared for immediate approach. Descend. To 1000, turn left heading 180. Flares and headlights are active. Call the field in sight. The pilot's voice was tight. Roger, tower. Descending, looking for the field. Nick's eyes darted to Carla, who was already on the phone with the ground crew. Light the next set of flares. Get those vehicles in position. She nodded, relaying the orders. Down on the runway, the crew braved the wind and rain, their figures barely visible in the gloom. Headlights snapped on, flares hissed to life, and the runway glowed faintly through the storm. Tower, Eagle 7. Field in sight. On final, Nick's heart pounded. Eagle 7. Wind steady at 240, 10 knots. You are cleared to land. The jet emerged from the clouds, its landing lights piercing the rain. It touched down hard, sending up a spray of water, but stayed on the runway. The ground crew cheered, their voices faint but jubilant. Nick allowed himself a brief smile before. Turning back to the next jet dot, the minutes blurred together. Each landing was a test of nerves, a dance of timing and trust. The storm battered the field, but Nick's voice never wavered. He lost track of time, lost track of everything but the task at hand. The world shrank to the glow of his flashlight. The scratch of his pencil and the steady stream of voices in his headset dot with each successful landing. The weight on his shoulders grew lighter. But the hardest was yet to come dot at 4:13. With only 4 jets left in the sky, a new voice broke through the static of voice Nick recognized instantly. Tower, this is Falcon 1. Instruments are failing. Fuel critical. Requesting priority. Landing. Falcon 1 was the squadron leader, a veteran pilot known for his cool under pressure. If he was worried, things were bad. Nick checked his notes. The runway was clear, but the wind had shifted, making the approach even more dangerous. Keyed the mic, his voice steady. Falcon 1, cleared for immediate approach. Descend to 1000. Turn right heading 220. Flares and headlights are active. Call the field in sight. A pause then. Roger, tower. Descending, looking for the field. Nick watched the runway, willing the jet to appear. The seconds stretched into eternity. Tower, Falcon 1. Field in sight. On final, Nick exhaled, relief flooding through him. Falcon 1, wind steady at 240, 12 knots. You are cleared to land. The jet touched down, skidding on the wet runway, but the pilot kept it under control. The ground crew erupted in cheers, their relief palpable. Nick slumped, back in his chair, exhaustion threatening to overwhelm him. But there were still 3 jets left. He checked his notes, called up the next pilot, and repeated the process. Each landing was a triumph of teamwork and trust, a testament to the power of calm under pressure. Finally, at 4:37, the last jet touched down. The room erupted in applause. The tension breaking at last. Nick sat back, his hands shaking, his voice hoarse. He had done it. He had landed 42 jets in a blackout, in the middle of the worst storm the base had seen in years. The other controllers crowded around him, their faces alight with admiration and gratitude. Harlan clapped him on the shoulder. You saved them, Nick. You saved us all. Davis, the veteran who had once mocked him, offered a handshake. Never seen anything like it, kid. You're a damn hero. Nick smiled, the weight of the night lifting at last. He had faced his fears, conquered his doubts, and proven to everyone, including himself, that he was more than his stutter, more than their expectations. As the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the power flickered back to life. The radar screens glowed, the lights snapped on, and the world returned to normal. But nothing would ever be the same. Nick stood at the window, watching the jets lined up on the tarmac, their pilots safe and sound. He felt a sense of pride, of belonging, that he had never known before. He had found his voice not in spite of his stutter, but because of it. He had learned that true strength comes not from perfection, but from perseverance. And as the base commander entered the tower, shaking his hand and thanking him for his courage, Nick knew that he had finally earned his place among the best. But the greatest reward was the knowledge that, when the world went dark, he had been the light that guided them home. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting a pale glow through the rain-streaked windows of the control tower. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean, but forever changed. Inside the tower, the atmosphere was electric, not with tension, but with a quiet, profound relief. Nick sat back in his chair, exhaustion weighing heavily on his limbs, but a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. 42 jets had landed safely through the blackout and the storm, guided by his voice, the voice that had once been a source of ridicule and doubt. The room was filled with the murmurs of the other controllers, their faces alight with admiration and newfound respect. Even the veterans who had once mocked him now looked at him with something close to awe. Harlan, the gruff supervisor, approached Nick, his usual stern expression softened. You did good, kid, real good. Nick nodded, the words feeling strange. But welcome. Thank you, sir. Davis, the veteran controller who had been the loudest critic, stepped forward and extended his hand. I owe you an apology, Nick. I was wrong about you. You kept your head when it mattered most. Nick shook his hand, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. I just did my job, but it was more than that. It was a victory over fear, over doubt, over the voice inside that had always told him he wasn't good enough. The base commander entered the tower, his presence commanding attention. He looked around at the exhausted but triumphant team, and then fixed his gaze on Nick. Tonight, you showed us all what true courage looks like, he said. Not the kind that shouts and storms the battlefield, but the quiet, steady kind that guides others through the darkness. You saved lives, Nick, and for that we are all grateful. Nick felt a warmth spread through him, a sense of belonging he had never known. He realized that his stutter was not a weakness, but a part of his story, a story of perseverance and strength. As the team began to pack up, the chatter turned to plans for the future. Nick's colleagues spoke of him with respect, eager to learn. from his example. Maverick, who had been watching from the sidelines, approached Nick with a knowing smile. "You've earned your place, son," he said quietly. "Remember, sometimes the voice that stumbles is the one that carries the most weight." Nick looked out the window at the rising sun, feeling a new confidence blossoming within him. He was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, and as the base returned to its routine, the story of the stuttering controller who landed 42 jets in a blackout would be told and retold, a testament to the power of courage, determination, and the human spirit. If you want to hear more stories of real heroes, of grit and heart, join the squad. Click subscribe and never miss a moment of the unexpected.